something to talk about. I'm Linda McNamee, and as you saw in our introduction, hopefully by the end of this hour, you will have the answer to why vote and why vote when. We did just have the primary elections. We're gearing up for November, everybody's favorite time of year. But before we begin and try to find the answers to that question, I would like to invite you to email me this evening. We are not live, we are pre-recording, so you can always email me at talk@bcattv.org. Doesn't matter whether, any time of day. Email box is always there. I do want to thank the crew for this evening. We have Noel Donahue, Evan Peckham, and Evan McNamee, who have given up their evening once again, and it is a school night, so I'm very glad that they're giving up their evening to come hang out at BCAT. And I want to thank my husband Paul for staying home for Daddy Date Night, although with Evan here, Evan McNamee here, Daddy Date Night has gotten a little bit easier. And also, I can't forget, I also want to thank Jen Dodge, who is the executive director here and by default staff member, making sure that us volunteers get everything done and in a timely manner and come out looking pretty good. So thank you, Jen. And now I'd like to introduce my wonderful guest for this evening, whom you may have seen around town. If not, you definitely have heard her name. Amy Warfield, who's the Burlington Town Clerk.
Well, thank you, Linda.
Yay, I'm so glad you got to come.
Thank you, thank you.
Because I'm like, I just had you on the show like maybe a year ago, and I'm looking back in my notes, and I went, oh, 2016. I guess it's time to have you on again.
Oh, good.
So,
thank you.
Thank you for joining me. And before, again, I keep saying before this, but before we get into why vote, which I know I've asked you before, can you tell me and our viewers a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and how you came to Burlington?
Oh, sure. Well, I actually was a military kid.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
My parents, my father was assigned to a number of places around the United States. I grew up, did my high school, kind of middle school, high school in metropolitan Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So one of the unique things I think that prepared me for was our government teacher was a member of the Virginia State Legislature.
Oh, wow.
So they allowed him to spend some time with the legislatures when legislatures were a little more part-time. And then the rest of the year, during the school year, he was teaching us civics and government.
And
so,
wow.
So I think growing up near Washington, D.C., and that influenced by that teacher, got me interested in the political industry.
Okay.
My parents were also very active in civic organizations and that type of stuff, so that just kind of played it. And then I went to school up in Rhode Island, or down in Rhode Island from here, and moved to the Burlington area in the early 80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when you were in college, did you get a degree in government or?
No, actually, I went to a liberal arts college, and I have a degree in elementary education.
Me too.
Well, may help with some things with being a town clerk too.
Dealing with people who act like small children. No, that would never happen here.
But it gives you what it gives you is the skills that for dealing with and reacting to a lot of different situations, I think.
True. No matter how hard you plan a school day, it never goes as planned. So you kind of have to change directions midstream. So, okay. Yep. So right before we started recording, I foolishly said, oh, well, all the town clerk does is election coverage, but there's so much more.
Yeah.
Tell me about that so much more.
Well, basically, I am the chief election officer for the town, so we run the elections. But I'm also the chief records officer. So all the records, all the business meetings, all of that information and records that belong to the town doing business are something that I'm responsible for keeping track of, providing.
So it's like archiving also under
Archiving
your...
is also it, and in Burlington, we're really fortunate to have a full-time archivist. So, and that's rather unique in Massachusetts. Some towns have an archivist as part of their library system if they're an older town.
Okay.
But we really have an archivist that is focused on the business part of Burlington.
Okay.
The you know, what it not businesses, but the business that
administrative
Burlington does.
stuff?
Yeah, the administrative
Yeah,
stuff.
okay.
As
like
well
town
as,
meeting and select board.
Yeah,
and...
all of those minutes and everything. He really helps us with all of that, as well as another piece of what the town clerk does is we're also responsible for all the vital records. So births, deaths, marriages, all of those records have to be kept permanently.
How do you get those records?
In terms of how do we receive
Well, I'm
them
thinking
in?
like when my kids were born, they were born in Winchester.
Yeah.
So and I don't remember having to go to Winchester and bring it over here. So how does...
Well, basically, all of the towns are connected when it comes to things like vital records.
Okay.
So now, in fact, for births and deaths, we have an electronic system so that that information is started at one level by whoever's responsible, usually medically, for starting it, and then it does drift down. So like birth records, you get birth records in the town where you were born or the town where your parents were living at the time of your birth. So that's probably how we ended up with your
got there, but I'm like,
yeah.
How do they know?
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So, same thing true with deaths, you know, where you die as well as where you were living at the time of the death.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so all of those things are, you know, distributed from town to town as need be. And then the other thing is just also dealing with things like certifying documents that require the corporate clerk, if you want to think of it. And that's another term that sometimes town clerks are called, is that we're the clerk for the corporation. So we sign off on...
Because towns are incorporated.
Yeah, exactly. So we sign off on things like planning board decisions and board of appeals decisions and those kinds of things as well.
Well, I'm even thinking like marriage licenses. If you want a copy,
a certified
copy, you have to get that, you know, really cool stampy thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay.
So there's a lot of bits and pieces to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to be a history fanatic to do all of this too.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's good to know kind of too where Massachusetts came from, or where you know, kind of what the systems are set up on. I recently had a discussion with someone about the Constitution. And the fact that the Massachusetts Constitution was really the basis for the federal Constitution. Massachusetts ratified the Constitution in 1780. The federal Constitution wasn't ratified until 1788, and John Adams wrote both of them.
Was from Massachusetts.
Yeah, yeah. So
Massachusetts is so awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
We do a lot of starting of stuff here.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think I know this before the last, was it the last town election? Or I don't know, sometime between now and 2016.
Yeah.
Town clerk's an elected position.
Yes, it is in some towns.
Okay.
And in Burlington it is.
Because I'm thinking, shouldn't you find somebody who is an organized person to keep track of all of these records?
Yeah. Well, it is, but one of the reasons and one of the benefits of being elected is it also gives us a level of neutrality and being impartial. We're not under the pressure of who is our boss. So we are rather autonomous.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why town clerk started to be an elected position. I basically have 17,000 bosses because whoever could vote for me, you know, votes for me. So that's one of the benefits. Now, I do believe that more and more the job of clerk is possibly a piece that should be appointed in different situations.
Okay.
But what I still find in a number of city situations and that kind of stuff, it may be that it's not a professional clerk either. It's somebody who is appointed because of who they are, or where, you know.
Okay.
So that's one of the other things about being elected is that I think you have to work harder to be credible. And so I like
That's
that
true.
part of it
Okay.
too. So, and in Burlington, as an elected position, it's a 5-year term.
Okay.
Which again is
That was gonna be my
gives
next
us enough flexibility to be able to do all the things that we want to do in
Right,
that
yeah.
period, that time period.
Okay. Survive a couple of elections.
Yep,
Or
exactly.
more than a couple.
Yeah.
How often are the town elections?
The
Are
town
they-
elections are annual.
They are annual.
Yeah.
Okay.
So every year, different seats are up for re-election.
Okay.
For instance, like with school committee, we usually elect about 2 people, and then the 3rd year there's just 1 person that is running.
Okay.
Select board is a 3-year seat as well, so it rotates through. So your
So
whole
you're not-
board doesn't change at
Yeah,
once. Yeah.
okay.
Which could be detrimental.
It could be.
You know. Same thing. Planning board has a 5-year term. The Board of Health has a 3-year term.
How are those terms developed or
Well,
determined?
They were
historical or?
yeah, some of it is historical. Some of it is also based on regulations from the state. So, you know, they give you a tolerance for how
Okay.
many years that you can have. And then when we were making up our bylaw, when we incorporated and were making up our bylaws, you know, the regulations were taken into consideration, and then we
Okay.
figured out where we wanted to be inside those. So right now, all the terms and those types of things are defined in our town bylaws.
Okay. I was hoping, you know, I'm thinking, wait, we were incorporated in 1799. I really hope you weren't part of that.
No, some days it may feel like it, but I
Like,
was not.
well, we decided, and I'm like, we decided, you know, a few years ago.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
okay. So, how is it through the bylaws that is determined whether a position is elected versus appointed? And how often does that change? I mean, because you have to change the bylaws, I'm guessing.
Well, yeah, bylaws are a living document.
Okay.
So, but what normally happens is there's a bylaw review committee even that meets
Okay.
all the time, and annually they'll bring it forward to a town meeting that they want to change this or adjust that kind of stuff. In general, I mean, there isn't that much change with
Okay.
elected versus appointed.
Okay.
Because again, the history of it works well. We did just, a few years ago, we did change our treasurer collector position
I
from
remember
being
that,
elected
yes.
to appointed.
Okay.
And there were pros and cons for why you do that. Different towns have elected treasurers, different towns have appointed. So it really depends on the complexion of the town too as
Okay.
to what that is. The other thing is that then we start that whole process I start that whole process in like November and December.
Okay.
Because I go through and I send out to all the candidates who are going to be up for re-election.
Okay.
Here's your seat is available, or your seat is coming up. You can start to take out papers the first week in January of the
Okay.
year. And do you think about whether you want
So
to do
even
that.
if they're up for re-election, they still have to go through the process as if they were new.
Right, and they basically, to be re-elected, you still have to go through an election process.
Okay.
So they do the same thing. They come in, they get nomination papers, they go get signatures, we certify those signatures, and that gets them on the ballot.
Okay.
And anybody who was new, that would want to run against an incumbent, or maybe an incumbent is not rerunning and there's an open seat,
Okay.
they can do the same thing. They come in, take out papers. They have a certain length of time depending on the calendar.
Okay.
And that's all set up. That's another thing that I get all set up in November and December to get
Okay.
out there for people so
To
they
start
know
in
what the
January.
deadlines are.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how much time before the election do you need for all that certification processes?
Well, at least it's about 45 days. So what
Okay.
happens is then I can get that information done and ready and to a printer.
Okay.
We can get the ballots ready and have them. Our final deadline is like 30 days before the election.
Okay.
then the printer gets us the ballots, and then we have ballots in about 3 weeks before the election.
Cool. So that's usually when you start, like, either
Sending out
absentee
absentees,
ballots
yeah.
or
Yeah.
just early voting.
Yeah. Well, and up to this point, we haven't had early voting in elections. The new special act or election act that was passed this year will allow us to do early voting for town elections starting in 2023.
We had it before, though.
We always had absentee voting, and that's the fine line difference.
Okay.
Absentee voting is part of our Constitution.
Okay.
And it is designed for people who are either unable to make it to the election on election day, they are because of religious reasons are unable to make it, or physically, or have an illness and can't make it. One thing that happened with COVID was that kind of got all opened up, and so the new election
darn
act,
global pandemics. Yeah.
The new election act in 2022, actually the state now said you can now do early voting, which means you don't have to have an excuse.
Right.
We would call it, our absentee voting was you required an excuse.
A reason that you couldn't vote on election day.
Exactly. And so that's what's one thing that has changed.
Okay.
And for a lot of people, they said, well, yeah, I always did this because I knew I was going to be away on the election day. Yes, you can still absentee vote if you want. The other thing that has come into play too is the vote by mail, where the state is sending out the card to everyone who is a registered voter so that they can send that back and we would mail them out a ballot.
But doesn't that complicate matters for you? Because they might vote by mail, but then still show up at the polls.
It does
So you have
put
to,
in
like,
another layer of complexity. The nice thing is, in the system that we have, there are a lot of checks and balances. So yes, with the vote by mail, for instance, they send us in a card. We verify that they're a registered voter in Burlington. We, when we get the ballots, we send them out a ballot. It's tracked with a barcode on it, and so even if and we know whether they've returned the ballot or not returned the ballot, and then they could show up at election day, and with our new poll pads,
I saw
the
those.
iPads,
Those are cool.
They're very nice. They really have, and most of the public has been it's been well received. So what happens when you come in, it says you've already received a ballot. And so then you need to go to our admitted voters table and we check it and we say, okay, yeah, you received a ballot, but now you want to vote in person? Yes, okay. So they fill out a authorization and then they're sent back to the precinct and then they can vote. And on the affirmation, it's basically saying that this is the first ballot back. This is the one that will be counted. All other ballots. And some people have brought in their ballots and said, well, I thought it was too late to mail it in, but I want to vote here today. So we take that ballot, we spoil it, we write spoil on it, and then we track that to say, okay, this one was not returned, but then they came and voted in person. So there's a lot of checks and balances in the system.
Because I'm also thinking, what happens like after the election if it arrives?
Yeah, well, it varies. One of the things with the Voting Act was for primaries, because we have such a short window between the primary and the general election, the deadline was 8 p.m. on September 6th.
Which was election day?
Which was election day. So you had to have it back. It didn't matter when it was postmarked or whatever, those ones, and everybody who maybe mailed their ballot back late, we have sent out a rejection letter to them letting them know why it wasn't counted. So
they
everybody is notified,
get it returned saying, too late.
Yeah,
well,
with the state election in November, the deadline will allow for anybody who has a postmarked by November 8th. So we will have a certain number
okay.
of days. I want to say it's 7 days or 10, 7
okay.
to 10. I've forgotten that date. I will look it up.
Just get your ballot in early and you won't
That's
have to
right.
worry about
Exactly.
it.
I mean, we should probably start to have ballots around October 1st.
Okay.
So, and that's another good point, Linda. Anybody who filled out that card for September and put all elections,
Yep.
they will be getting a ballot in November.
Oh,
so they don't
okay.
have to fill out another card. They don't have to worry about filling out another application.
Okay.
The other thing is anybody who did not fill out that card we have no record of them requesting a ballot. They will be getting a second card this week or next week saying,
okay.
do you want to vote in the November election?
Okay.
So there's a lot of kind of personal advertising.
Yeah, like it's a lot of reminders.
Yeah, there really is. There really is a lot. And I think that's good. I think we'll see whether that really encourages more people to vote.
Okay.
And to come out. I mean, Massachusetts in general has always had a pretty good turnout
For national elections or just
for
elections in general?
over the whole, even local elections.
Okay.
One thing that's unique about Massachusetts and a lot of New England is a lot of states don't have town elections like we do.
Okay.
They a lot of them are run on a counting system. There may be a what they call millage, a tax election.
Oh, okay.
But not the kinds of elections that we have.
Okay.
And so across the board, even Massachusetts local elections are pretty well attended, compared to the rest of the country.
Okay.
So although I get frustrated with town elections being 15 to 20%.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that. I mean,
yeah,
that's abysmal.
yeah, it is. But compared to a lot of other places, it's considered pretty good. So, and then most certainly for the national elections, or even for us elections, if there is a federal office on the ballot,
Okay.
we usually do have a pretty good turnout.
So every 2 years, pretty much.
Well, every 2 years, every 2 years. Well, every 2 years we have at least a representative on the ballot.
Right. Okay.
It's when we have like a senator and a representative.
Okay.
For Congress that we get good turnouts.
Congress is every 2 years, and Senate is 6.
6, correct? Yeah.
And President is 4.
Yeah.
Okay. I do remember something from 10th
there
grade.
You go. So yeah, so it really varies, in terms of what the interest on the ballot is. Obviously, presidential elections,
Right.
we're up in the 85 to 87% turnout.
Still pretty good.
Yeah. And then with having a senator and a congressman on the ballot, we tend to be in the 55 to 60% turnout.
That doesn't seem really good to me.
Well, it's hard.
Well, because I'm just saying, do the math. I mean, if you only have 15% of the vote, that's 85% of the people who didn't care enough to vote, and that could, those 85% of the people could really swing an election in a totally different way.
Well, and my other thing is that a lot of times when I'm talking to people about elections, I'll ask them, did they vote? Well, I vote in the important elections. And one of my comebacks to that is, do you realize that a local election, you're voting for the people that are actually spending your tax dollars, because people like select board and school committee and board of health and planning board, those are the people that are spending the tax money that we all pay in. Most certainly we still pay federal taxes, but when the difference between being one of 3,000 people that are making a decision and 1 in 6 million, or
you kind of have to
33
weigh the
billion,
odds.
or whatever the population of the country is.
Yeah.
That your vote becomes even smaller.
Right.
So sometimes I say, well, it's hard to say which ones are the most important ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, if you're not going to vote, you can't complain.
That's very true.
You know, if you vote, then you can complain if you don't like the results. But if you have no part in that decision-making process. So back to town meeting. So the way Burlington is structured, town meeting members kind of make a lot of those decisions. They get to, you know, spend your tax dollars in part. How, it just doesn't seem, maybe it's just me, I might live in a cave or something, but it doesn't seem like town meeting members are as big of a presence in town compared to like the select board.
Well, yeah, I think because they are the legislative branch. Okay, so they're not, they are, for each precinct, they're one of 18 people representing your precinct. Where a select board, and the select board or the executive branch, they're the ones that are kind of making the decisions and maybe setting policy. So I always try to say that really, again, back to your question about who's spending our money, is town meeting members are really the ones who are deciding where money will be spent.
So how do we find out who our town meeting, other than going in, looking at the ballot and go, oh, that person's my town meeting?
Well, I encourage people, one of the wonderful things we have is a pretty robust website. And so on the website, if you go in the very front page to government, and town meeting is one of the options there, you can get a list of all your town meeting members, their contact information. I've had a couple of people who said, oh, that person's my neighbor, they're 2 doors down. So I suggest to them, well, go and talk to them.
Knock on their door.
Go find out what, you know, let them know what you think. Different town meeting members have reached out to their constituents in a lot of different ways. And so I really encourage people to just, that's a really simple way of getting involved. And you can run for town meeting. We in Burlington have a representative town meeting, which means we have elected representatives. And so, you know, come every January if you're interested in what's going on in your precinct and who's representing you, you can find that out, and then you can run for town meeting.
Couple questions. On the website, because I have also remember looking at the ballot and says that, you know, there's only 4 names and you can vote for 5. So on the website, does it say that there are 3 seats available or 1 seat available or full?
So again, every year in kind of preparation for the election, I start really early with saying, okay, these are the seats that are available, this is the number, and as people take out their papers and everything, I keep that up to date. So that, you can see, oh, wait a minute, you know, it's 2 weeks before the papers are due, and there's still a seat open. Maybe I should come take out papers and get my 16 people to sign my paper. And
that's it? 16 people? That's it?
And,
wow, I was expecting like 200 or something.
No. Even for a town-wide office is only 50. So you get those signatures, and then you can be put on the ballot.
And Burlington has 7 precincts now,
We have
right?
7 precincts,
Are they divided by population? So are each of the 7 like roughly the same population?
A precinct can't have more than 4,000 people in it. And so when it comes time, that happens every 10 years with the federal census. And so what happens is we then, and we had to do it this year a little bit, is we have to change the lines to be able to balance out the numbers. Any precinct cannot have more or less than 5% in that number than any other precinct. So they stay pretty well balanced. Now the interesting thing that happens, of course, is that sometimes you have precincts that have a lot more families in them, and so although that 4,000 number is very close and equal, sometimes registered voters are a different number.
So it goes by people and not registered voters.
That's correct. So it's by people. So that's just the
Wow.
way, that's the regulations that are set up from the federal government, and that's what we
Okay.
follow. So
Alrighty then. Oh, backing up, got another question
Yeah.
about federal elections or non-town elections versus town elections.
Yeah.
Why do we have two separate election days 5 months apart?
okay, well,
Because
a lot of that is regulations from the state.
Okay.
A piece of it going back probably a couple hundred years ago dealt with, because our financial cycle is run on a fiscal year.
All right.
So it ends on July 1st.
Okay.
So we want to have in place an electorate to be able to have town meeting, to be able
Okay.
to pass the budget for starting in July.
So if the election's in April, it gives everybody like May roughly
Yeah.
in their new positions, and then they get
we
to
get, well,
get
then
up
we
to
get town
speed.
meeting can actually vote, because town meeting then votes for the budget in May. That's going to be
Okay.
starting in July.
July.
The other thing is that the federal elections are set in the Constitution, and it's in November.
First Tuesday after the first Monday
Monday,
in
yeah.
November.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
Sounds kind of random, but okay, I remembered
there's some
it.
formula there, but it's been that way, and so that's one of the, kind of one of the differences. The other interesting thing is, from a technical standpoint, is we can't run a town election with on a state or federal ballot,
Okay.
because the town elections are controlled and monitored by the town.
Okay.
The select board is the one that kind of sets all of that stuff. So we would actually, and some towns have done it, we'd actually have to have two different ballots.
Which makes sense.
Right. So you'd have a check-in for the state ballot, you'd have a check-in for the town ballot, then people would have to vote 2 pieces of paper and then take them back.
But
So
you'd only have to get them into the polls once.
Yeah. But I don't, and towns that do it do not see any
They don't see any
increase.
difference?
Yeah. There are, sometimes the towns will have a special election.
Okay.
And so they'll figure, and it does save some money, because you're you're
Okay.
not setting up a separate day, but they don't see that big an increase in the, like, you will see an increase in town election voting only because you've got more people coming.
Okay.
But the number of people who actually vote, we have this thing on ballots. People can just not vote for names.
Okay.
And we lovingly call it Mr. Blank. Mr. Blank one.
I love it. Okay.
What they
So they
see-
don't color in any
they
circles.
won't, they won't, they'll take the 2 ballots.
I got the ballot. I don't like anybody. Here
yeah,
you
and they'll
go.
just put it into the machine, which then shows they voted.
Yeah.
But
Well, they shouldn't get to wear the sticker then, because they didn't really vote.
they didn't really vote. But yeah, so it's an interesting thing that it's like even early voting, it doesn't always drive an increase that people
Okay.
thought it would.
Okay. So I'm looking through my list. We covered a lot of this. How do you register to vote? Because we said you want to take you meaning the general
Yeah.
public wants to take responsibility for those who make decisions
Right.
that directly impact you. So once I turn 18 years old, what do I do?
Well, you don't even have to wait till you're 18.
Oh, I don't. Okay. It's been a long time since I've seen
I know,
18,
yeah.
but I'm just using that as an
Exactly.
example.
Some of us
Okay.
don't really kind of have to worry about that. But in Massachusetts, basically, when you go to the RMV
Okay.
after the age of 16, as part of getting your driver's license or updating your car registration or any of that, there is now a option that says, do you want to register to vote?
Oh, okay.
And again, one thing that changed a couple of years ago is that check mark is automatically checked off.
Oh, so you have to uncheck it.
You have to uncheck it.
Okay, well, that's pretty clever.
Yeah, so basically everybody is, they call it automatic voter registration.
Okay.
So everybody is automatically registered to vote. And then, so if you're 16 or 17, it puts you in a category called pre-registration. So that sits in our online registration system until you actually turn 18.
Okay.
And then even when there's a deadline, like for this coming November election, the deadline is now October 29th.
Okay.
If you turn 18 after October 29th but before November 8th, you're still registered to vote. It will just it basically takes anybody who turns 18 by election day.
So if your birthday is November 6th, you can still vote.
Right, because you're
What if your birthday's on election day?
It still counts. It's on or before. So yeah. So if you happen to have been born on election day,
well, election day changes every year.
But yeah, but that you are registered. So that's one of the things. The other nice thing is the Secretary of State has a really good website now that they've really made robust, and if you go on to voteinma.com. It will tell you, you can see whether you're registered, you can register, you can check your ballot, you can request a ballot. It's really got all the elements about voting at that particular website. If you'd like to, we'd still love to see your face, and you can always come in and fill out a registration form in person.
Okay. Because I'm thinking, not everybody, as soon as they turn 16, want a license or are able to get a license. And once you vote, you're good for life, right?
Well, you're good as long as you stay in the town, or again, if you stay in Massachusetts, if you change your driver's license or your car registration, it will move you. It's when you move to another state or come in from another state, or if you, one thing we sometimes see is with kids who go to college out of state, if they register out of state, they can be, we get notified from that state. And then when they come back, this is one of the things, is they'll come back and they're like, well, I was registered to vote. And it's like, well, what did you do
You're
in
registered
like 20,
in California.
what did you do in 2020? Oh, I was in college. Did you register to vote there? Oh yeah, we registered on campus. So yeah, so you do have to kind of just keep an eye on it, I think. It's the best thing I could tell people.
So checking the website should be able to tell you.
By going to that website, it'll tell you what your status is, and you can take care of it at that point.
Okay. I'm going to throw you a curveball because I don't think it was there, but earlier today I was talking with someone and they said, well, what if you're not a citizen, but you own a house, you pay taxes, shouldn't you get the right to vote?
Well, right now in Massachusetts, you have to be a U.S. citizen and over the age of 18 to vote. There are some communities, I think there's some communities down on the Cape, because they have a large population of people who own property there, that kind of stuff. They, if they make a bylaw or in their charter allowing a property owner to vote on tax issues, that's usually how it's worded. Because again, that affects them directly, even though they may not be
that's
a resident,
kind of why we were,
in Massachusetts. So yeah. So right now, a citizen, resident of Massachusetts, or resident of the town, and then over the age of 18 are the three kind of criteria.
So if I move, I live in Burlington now. If I moved to Billerica and changed my license, then I would automatically, next election, be able to vote in Billerica.
Usually what will happen is you'll get a notification too from the system. So when you, as long as you check off that box.
Right. But if I move to Connecticut,
you would have to register in Connecticut.
I would have to re-register. What?
Yeah.
But if I changed my license to reflect my Connecticut address, it would probably.
Well, what
If
will
they-
happen is it lets us know that there's a change, but all we can do is, and this is another thing with Massachusetts, all we can do is then send you a card to say, are you still living here?
Okay.
And
So
that-
for like the snowbirds that spend half the year in Florida and half the year in Massachusetts, they
Yeah.
can only vote in one.
One, correct, yeah. And the other thing is that in Massachusetts, we also do an annual census.
Okay.
And that's where we do pick up a lot of people that, either might be snowbirds or might have moved during that period, since the last election, and it allows us to keep our voter records pretty up to date.
Oh, okay. Now, is all of this computerized?
Yeah, most of it is.
Like, wait a minute.
It still takes a little bit, it still takes one person in my office to deal with all of the automatic voter registrations and all that kind of stuff. Because you still, computers can only do what they're told to do.
Right.
So you still have to
still a lot
look
of
at people
entry
and that kind of stuff.
okay.
Like we had an incident recently where it looked like we had somebody who we might have had them in twice, but they're actually twins and they have very close names.
Oh,
And so it was like,
okay.
is this the same person or just two
Same
people
name,
with the same
same address,
birthday? Yeah,
same
similar,
birthday.
Yeah. So I mean, it still
And
takes
one
that
letter,
human.
you
Yeah,
know.
it still takes that human intervention to figure it out. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to ask you another question, and I completely forgot about it. Oh, did we finish talking about like state primaries and how they performed?
No,
we?
not
No,
really.
not
Just kind
really.
of generally.
Okay,
This
let's go back to that.
September state primary.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a 23% turnout.
Okay, how does
so
that compare to other elections that we've had?
It's
Other
kind of in
primary
the middle
elections?
of primaries.
Okay.
Obviously, presidential primary polls, the presidential election, anything with a presidential election polls
Okay.
skews high. But the 23% is kind of right in the middle of what we usually get for a state primary. State primaries with like sitting governors running tend to be
Okay.
less. This year, most certainly, it's interesting because we don't have a sitting governor who's running.
Right.
But we had a very clear candidate on the Democratic side. So I think that that's one thing that probably gave us in
Drew
that
people?
23%.
Okay.
Yeah. So kind of probably, again, average for what we
Okay.
usually do for a primary.
Okay. We only have about 15 minutes left, which may seem like a lot of time, but in preparing my questions, I'm like, oh, I only remember hearing about one question that's going to be on the ballot.
Yeah.
And I, did a little Google search and I thought I only found one question, and then I showed up tonight and you're like, no, there's 5.
Yeah.
So can we kind of go over
Sure.
what those 5 are?
Sure. Yeah, in general terms, the 5 of them, one deal with taxes, the other was dealing with health care, the third one is alcohol limits, and the fourth one is driver's license, or they put it under transportation.
Okay.
And so what it is in all of those, the tax one is resetting the tax rate on different income.
Okay.
The healthcare.
That's the fair share one?
That's the fair
Okay.
share one. The healthcare one is dealing with putting in some controls for companies that provide dental plans for healthcare.
Oh, okay.
The third one with alcohol is controlling, putting in some limits for how many alcohol licenses a particular company or organization, like store chain, that kind of stuff could get.
Okay.
And then the fourth one that's going to be statewide is dealing with the driver's license, whether you have to be a citizen resident to be able to get
Okay.
driver's licenses. And then the fifth one that we're going to have in Burlington. See, it varies from
Okay,
town to
well,
town.
you
Go
said
ahead.
the fourth one was, the driver's license was a state. What are
Yeah.
the other 3?
The other 3 are state ones.
Oh, they are all-
So
okay.
all 4 of those
All
are
state,
are
okay.
all state. They're
Sorry,
gonna
I
appear
missed
on-
that.
That's okay. they're going to appear on everybody's ballot across the state.
Okay.
And then in Burlington, we will have a question dealing with Community Preservation Act funds.
That's the one I was thinking of. Okay.
So that's the one that is just to Burlington. And there are some different groups that are supporting it and against it. They will be out with information as the
So you'll probably
election
get a
gets
little
close.
postcard in the mail or something.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly, yeah.
Or a knock at
A
your door.
flyer, yeah.
Okay, how does something become a question?
Well, on the state level.
Let's do state first.
On the state level, what it is there's a whole process where a group has to come together and decide we're going to make this a question, and then they go to the Attorney General, and the Attorney General determines whether it's valid to be put on a ballot, and then sends them off to get a certain number of signatures.
Okay.
Then when they get that first round, then the Attorney General kind of dives into it further and determines whether the question really is valid. Is it ready to be put on a ballot, say, in the next year, the next cycle?
Isn't that kind of subjective, though?
Well, that's why there's this process. You know,
Okay.
I mean, it is subjective, but it's a little bit like going to court.
Well, because I'm just thinking, a question could be something totally ridiculous, like this group decides all taxis should be purple.
Yeah.
And, the Attorney General could say, okay, if you get the signatures, sure.
Yeah.
But
well, in the first pass, sometimes it is kind of like that. I mean, they're very open to, okay, well, it's nothing that is illegal or, whatever.
Yeah.
And so they'll let them start through the process.
Okay.
And then in the second round is when they kind of really say, okay, if this were a law, is it enforceable? Is it not detrimental or discriminatory or, all of those things?
Okay, so there's
So there's a couple levels, and then they go out again with another set of signatures to actually get it on the ballot.
Oh, okay.
So that's what, it's been kind of in the past couple of months that we've had signatures to certify, making sure that people were Burlington residents, that kind of stuff. And then it goes to the Secretary of State's office, and they are responsible for putting it on to the ballot.
Okay.
Now with local questions, it's a little bit similar but different. Basically, what has to happen is, depending on your exact form of government, if you have a town meeting form of government, it has to be approved by town meeting to then state that they are requesting that the Secretary of State puts this on the next ballot.
Okay. Now, sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt,
it's
but
okay.
with town meeting,
Yeah.
is it like a majority of them? Is it 75%? Is it,
It's a majority.
Okay.
Yeah. So they basically say, is this going to go onto the ballot? Whether they want, what do they want? And again, this is where, at least in a representative town meeting, your representatives are voting for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I try to say to people, reach out to them if you are for something or against it.
Yeah. Okay.
Because sometimes they are working in a void. They are getting some input, but not a lot. So.
And if they don't get that input, they're just doing what they want.
Right, exactly.
In essence. Okay.
So that was the process then with the CPA that passed town meeting, and so that's now on the ballot for November as well. That'll be the fifth question for Burlington. So.
Okay.
And just a key to you in terms of voting, it will probably be on the back side of the ballot will be two-sided. So
okay.
try to remind people to flip it over and look at the back. Yeah.
Flip. I had always thought that, a question on the ballot was just because the legislators didn't want to make a decision. What is the difference between my approaching the Attorney General to say, I want this as a question, versus my going to town meeting and saying, I think this should be a law?
Well, what it is that in terms of, again, back to the state level, it's that opportunity for a grassroots effort.
Okay.
Because maybe the legislature doesn't feel that that's a decision that they want to be making, or they don't have a sense of that being important to people. And so it gives the grassroots effort, the grassroots, kind of the ability to say, this is important to us, and we feel a lot of people in the state feel the same way we do. So we can get this going. Because
I'm just always wondering, where is that line between?
Well, and while the legislature is responsible for a lot of the laws and that kind of stuff, it's the beauty of our system in that we do have a lot of different input and different ways to be able to get action taken.
Okay. Speaking of action, we had mentioned 23% of voters at the most recent primary.
Yeah.
But we've also seen local elections at 12%.
Yeah.
What can we, as just normal citizens of the community, do to bring that number up?
Well, I think, again, it takes individuals deciding that they want to have their voice heard, and they want to participate, and they would like to be part of the process. A lot of it is you can't force people to do something they don't care about.
Right.
And so, I think vote by mail and early voting and has certainly made it easier.
Right.
It's no longer, I couldn't make it on election day. There's a lot of alternatives. But until we have something that really sparks people's passion or is something that they are really interested in, I don't know how else we do it.
Yeah.
Because, I do send out robocalls and all that kind of stuff. I know I get to be a pest. But it's like, looking back through our elections over the past 30 years in Burlington, our best turnout for local elections dealt with Proposition 2.5 overrides, or lack or not.
Wow.
So it's those are the things that get people concerned.
Okay.
So I think that,
How often does that come up? Because when you mentioned Proposition 2.5, all of a sudden I had flashbacks to when I was in third grade, which is a lot longer than 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
Well, in Burlington, we haven't done it since the 70s, mainly because, again,
which is when I was in third grade.
There
Okay.
You go. Mainly because the select board and the planning boards that were around in the 60s and 70s did a great job of building a structure in Burlington that allowed for us to have the residential area and this commercial industrial area, which we continue to benefit from in so many ways. There are a lot of towns around us that don't have the kind of flexibility we have with our kind of two areas that to fund things. Yeah, I mean, the ability to say that, we do, with all our restaurants and everything, we do get tax revenue from that. That gives us a lot of flexibility as a town. So I think, I know we haven't been close to Proposition 2.5, where other towns, especially a lot of smaller towns, they're continually saying, how are we going to we got to raise our tax rate and, that kind of stuff. The other thing, too, that benefits Burlington is because our housing prices do
Yeah, I kind of noticed that recently.
Exactly, you know. So, and it's got pluses and minuses.
Okay.
You know, there are, like, the fact that, you know, our moderate income housing is,
Yeah.
yeah. So it, you know, it is, but that those things kind of again play into, are people feeling enough or emphasis to go in and get involved, or is everything's going very well?
Right. But it's going well now.
Yeah.
Who knows what tomorrow's going to be?
That's right. But you know, again, trying to get people engaged in something that is maybe not affecting their lives.
Okay. Short of running for an election, I just kind of want to touch upon, how would someone go about helping with the election process, whether it's working at the polls, whether it's, what else is there?
Well, the main thing that I'm always interested in is people who are interested in working at the polls.
Okay.
It's got a small pay, it is a paid position.
Oh,
it's
okay,
not volunteer.
cool.
And
I thought maybe you paid them with stickers or something.
That's right. They get more I voted stickers. Yeah, no. And what we do is we're always interested in people who might be interested, so they can contact the office, and we have a little application that they have to fill out, so we can see where they're at, or
make
see
sure they're
what
a
their
registered voter.
Yeah, exactly. And then also, see there's some training we give them and that kind of stuff. Okay. Especially with the poll pads, there are a lot of the
things.
Younger people are interested in helping out with it, and so I mean, we're always looking for good people, like everybody. We're looking for good people that might be interested in investing a day or half a day.
Okay, and if you do it this election, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it next election.
Yeah.
Although I did notice when I was walking into the polls this time, I'm like, ooh, okay, I live in precinct 5, but I know somebody who's working in 1, I know somebody who's working in 2, and it's like, ooh, I know these people. Yeah. It's just so cool.
Yeah, it is, and that's one of the things for the people that have been doing it for a while. They really enjoy it because it is maybe one of the few places where you can get a real cross section of people coming out.
And you don't get to work in your own precinct.
Not normally.
Not normally. Okay. Oh, so that isn't like a hard fast rule. It's okay.
Yeah. But we try to mix it up.
Okay. I did feel really bad because when I did walk in, you know, I was waiting for those big sheets of paper where they go up, and they just had the little iPad, and I spell out my last name, spell out my address, and the next person comes along and just scans their license. I'm like,
yeah, you don't.
She never asked me for my license.
Well, and see, that's the fine line in Massachusetts. We can't require ID.
Right.
We're not allowed. But the poll pads will scan your driver's license. So that's another thing. It doesn't store any data. People are very concerned about storing data.
Right.
All it's doing is it's actually the barcode that's on the back of your license is the same barcode that identifies your voter ID.
Okay.
So all we're doing is scanning that, and it's matching up. It's like at the grocery store.
There you go.
This is a box of cornflakes. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, this is a box of tissue. Oh, this is STALindaMcNamee, and she's here to vote.
And she's here to
so
vote.
Yeah. So it is. But we usually have a sign in front that says, you know.
Well, I probably missed the sign.
You can use your ID, or if you want to, you know.
All right.
And it's just fun.
We are at a tie-in, and it was fun.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for joining me. I know it was kind of last minute, but I'm very glad that you were able to find time in your very busy schedule between elections. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
And I also want to thank everyone at home for tuning in this evening. I hope you have been motivated to make sure you're registered to vote. And make sure you vote, because your vote is important. So thank you very much for tuning in. Have a great evening, and I'll see you around town. Good night.